The World Cup, it's coming home. We've all heard it at some point. What do English fans mean when they chant it or spam the socials? Well, if you have landed on my channel, you're most likely acquainted that football, as we know it at least, was birthed in England. It is easy to fall into quick conclusions about the English national team, but today I want to burst the idea that England is just not good enough for the World Cup. Let me show you why the home of football remains a beacon for the sport. From jotting down the first official rules of the beautiful game, to winning the World Cup in 1966 and everything before and after, let us go back in time and revisit the glory days and gloomy years of the English national team. The national team of England was formed at the same time as Scotland's. That makes it one of the two oldest national football teams. They played their first matches against each other already in 1870 and therefore are imprinted in the early history of the game. The very first match between the two nations was on March 5, 1870, and the ground was the Oval in London. Quite symbolic, the match ended in a 1-1 draw. Before the rest of the world had incorporated football, England, together with other British nations, contested each other in the annual British Home Championship. England would be successful in the football tournament that was played at the Olympic Games in the beginning of the century. At the 1900 London Summer Olympics, football was included for the first time, and the British national teams were represented as Great Britain. They won the tournament, but only two other nations, France and Belgium, would partake. After being absent in the 1904 Summer Olympics, Great Britain would again win the gold medal in the 1908 edition. They would continue their dominance in Olympic football tournaments until 1920, when Norway would defeat the British team. The latter only had amateur players on the field. This caused a major rift between the British Olympic Association and the Olympic Committee. The FA wanted to keep professionals outside of Olympic football tournaments, whereas FIFA and the Olympic Committee had other plans. Prior to the creation of the World Cup, FIFA's scope of work included setting rules for the growing sport. Great Britain would withdraw from the next two Olympic football tournaments. Now, the FA did join FIFA at the turn of the century, but as the inventor of the sport, they didn't see a clear reason to subordination after the 1928 dispute over amateurism and broken time payments. They left the organization. It meant that England wouldn't participate in the first World Cup, which was arranged in Uruguay in 1930. The Great Britain team would return to the Olympics in the 1936 edition. They were eliminated in the second round against Poland. However, the invention of the World Cup had changed the map completely. The Olympic football tournament was no longer the foremost settlement of football dominance. England would not participate in the World Cup until the 1950 edition in Brazil, after rejoining FIFA in 1946. As the inventor of the sport, would finally compete in the most prestigious international tournament. The outcome would be a shocker. England won their first match against Chile, but would then lose to the United States and Spain. They were out in the group phase, and the defeat against the United States was perhaps the biggest humiliation. There's an urban myth claiming that in England, newspapers thought there was a mistake in the message arriving from Brazil, thinking England had won over the United States 10-1 instead of losing 1-0 to the Americans. The myth has since been busted. In the following World Cup, Switzerland 1954, England would be eliminated in the quarterfinals by Uruguay. And then, the preparations for the 1958 World Cup would suffer a tragic setback after the Munich air disaster claimed the life of multiple Manchester United and England players. Occurring only a few months before the World Cup, the grim tragedy reminded many of a similar fate Italy suffered with the Torino air disaster. Aside from the accident, it was starting to become clear to England that football had long gone beyond their borders, and perhaps a reevaluation of the national team was in order. They saw their World Cup record improve 4 years later when the team traveled to Chile for the 1962 edition. Drawn into a difficult group with Hungary, Argentina, and Bulgaria, England expected to face tough competition. After opening their run with a 2-1 loss to Hungary, their chances of going through seemed slim. However, a convincing 3-1 victory over Argentina and a 0-0 draw with Bulgaria meant that they were through. England's advancement, though, was stopped in the quarterfinals by a brilliant and eventual winners, Brazil. England had as best reached the quarterfinals in a World Cup, but it would be a completely different story when they played on home ground in 1966. That year, football quite literally went home. Even with FIFA running the show, the FA retained a great deal of influence over the sport, and 2 decades after rejoining FIFA, England were granted the honor of hosting the World Cup. Here's a fun anecdote. Prior to the 1966 World Cup, the Jules Rimet trophy was stolen from an exhibition display, and a legendary dog by the name of Pickles found the trophy wrapped in newspaper hidden in a London bush. In the first match against Uruguay, which was goalless, England didn't look like a potential champion. But after that draw, they would win the remaining games. 1966 was a World Cup with few goals, as teams began to play much more tactically and defensively. This was exemplified by Alf Ramsey's England, as they finished top of Group 1 with only 4 goals, having kept a clean sheet in all games. The remaining road to the final saw England clash with Argentina, a tough match until Hurst scored a winner with little over 10 minutes remaining on the clock. In the semi-final clash with Portugal, the English had their biggest challenge to date at a World Cup. They had a final at hand, but first would have to get past Eusebio's Portugal. Sir Bobby Charlton was the hero of the night, scoring twice in 80 minutes. Eusebio halved England's advantage, scoring a penalty just 2 minutes after going down 2-0. But it wasn't enough to best the hosts, who were on their way to play their first final. At long last, England was featuring in a FIFA World Cup final. London's Wembley Stadium was the venue for the final, and 98,000 people attended. After 12 minutes, Helmut Haller put West Germany ahead, but the score was leveled by Geoff Hurst 4 minutes later. Martin Peters would put England in the lead in the 78th. England looked set to claim the title when the referee awarded a free kick to West Germany with 1 minute left. The ball was launched goalward, and Wolfgang Weber scored, with England appealing in vain for a handball as the ball came through the crowded penalty area. With the score leveled at 2-2 at the end of 90 minutes, the game went into extra time. In the 98th, Hurst found himself on the score sheet again. His shot hit the crossbar, bounced down into the goal line, and was awarded as a goal. Now, debate has long ranged over whether the ball crossed the line or not, with the goal becoming part of World Cup history. England's final goal was scored by Hurst again, as a celebratory pitch invasion began. Queen Elizabeth II presented the Jules Rimet trophy to England's captain Bobby Moore. The win in 1966 would, however, not mark the beginning of a golden era for the English national team. 40 years later, in Mexico 70, England would advance from their group after winning 2 out of 3, but faced elimination in the quarterfinals when the World Cup returned to Europe in West Germany 4 years later in 1974. England would not be in it. In the last match on home ground against Poland, England would have sealed the ticket to the upcoming World Cup, but they only managed a draw. It was the first time the English team had failed to qualify for the World Cup since joining FIFA. England would miss out yet again in the next 1978 edition in Argentina, this time after being rather unlucky in the qualification. Italy would take the place by goal difference. England was defeated in Rome, but would win in London in the 2 matches versus the Italians. The rest was a competition of making as many goals as possible against Finland and Luxembourg. Italy did 3 more. Spain hosted the 1982 World Cup, and England were back in the action, starting with 3 promising consecutive victories in the first group phase. This particular World Cup had a new setup with a second group phase. The opponents were West Germany and Spain. No goals were scored by either team. West Germany would, however, beat Spain in the third game and advance to the semifinals. England was out even though they hadn't lost a single match. Many of us have clear memories of what happened at the 1986 World Cup on account of the English team. The match versus Argentina in the quarterfinals, it's impossible to forget. It included one of the most controversial goals in history and one of the most brilliant. The first was the hand of God, which the referee missed or didn't want to see, and the second was the same man's dribbling from the other half all the way through England's goalkeeper's Peter Shilton. The 1990 World Cup in Italy could have been England's second great triumph in international football. It would, however, end in tears. Neither before nor after 1966 had England advanced through the quarterfinals. In 1990, they did, by beating the surprise team of the tournament, Cameroon. The Cameroon game was dramatic, and the next, against West Germany, brought even more drama. Unfortunately for England, the match was decided on penalties, one area of the game in which the English national team have shown to be inferior. Instead of the final, England would play and lose the third place match against Italy. England would fail to qualify for the 1994 World Cup. One could say they refused to partake in a tournament hosted in a country that calls the sport soccer. To be fair, the English really wanted to be there. But in the next edition of the tournament, held in France in 1998, they would be back in the heat after a great performance in the Euros. Two young players would instead redeem England's fans. The first, Michael Owen, who was only a substitute the first two matches. He only got 5 minutes in the first game and 9 in the second, which was enough to convert England's only goal against Romania. In the third group match, he started, but it was in the quarterfinal against Argentina that he really presented himself as a wonder boy after a solo raid resulting in the 1-0. The second young player was David Beckham. He scored a free kick against Colombia in the last group match, but in the end, he would become the scapegoat after a rash reaction against Diego Simeone in the round of 16, which reduced England to 10 men for most of the game. It would be the last act for England after another pitiful penalty shootout. In 2002, when the tournament was held in Asia for the first time, England arrived as usual with high expectations. The team advanced from the group, then won in impressive style over Denmark in the first playoff round, but was unlucky to face Brazil in the next match. They would defeat England in their way to become champions. The tradition for the English team was held at the 2006 edition in Germany. They were once again eliminated in the quarterfinals and once again after losing a penalty shootout. In the following World Cup in South Africa, England was eliminated in the last 16 and outperformed by Germany, who won 4-1. One could say Germany got justice for the 1966 final after Frank Lampard's goal was not added to the scoreboard, even though the ball clearly had crossed the line. England was placed in Group D together with Costa Rica, Italy, and Uruguay in the 2014 World Cup. They only managed to collect a single point in the match against Costa Rica and got an early trip back to Great Britain. Many have speculated as to why a great traditional football nation such as England haven't won more FIFA World Cups. Writers Simon Cooper and Stefan Szymanski claimed that the most heard arguments, including that England performed bad due to too many foreign players in their own league, are wrong. According to their calculations, there are more domestic players in England than any other big European league. They focus on two primary reasons as to why England doesn't succeed very well in big tournaments. The first is that there are too few English players in other big European leagues, except the Premier. The second is that there are too many matches in English football, making the players tired when the time comes from international tournaments. Personally, I think that World Cup winning squads tend to be composed of chunks of players that share club football. Take Italy 06 for example. The vast majority of players came from Juventus, Inter, and AC Milan. Same for Spain in 2010, mostly Barcelona and Real Madrid. Germany takes many of their players from Bayern, and even Brazil and Argentina tend to have multiple players who share the dressing room in Europe. To make my point shorter, England's national team is made up of the many great talents spread across the EPL giants and historical clubs. This is just my perception, but it seems to me that England have struggled historically to make their super talents come together under a style of play, falling short of expectations which are usually astronomically higher than most other World Cup contenders, adding a massive amount of pressure to an already difficult dressing room to manage. Now, I could go on and tell you what happened at the 2018 World Cup, and what happened last week versus France at the 2022 quarterfinals, but don't we all know? England have a great future heading into the next decade in my opinion. Bellingham, Saka, Foden, I can see them becoming generational players that could finally make a difference for England. The bottom line is, you can't talk about the beautiful game without having England in the conversation. They are the fathers of the game and a force to be reckoned with in football. Even if, for some people, their single World Cup triumph seems to be little compared to other giants. And what do you guys think? Will it ever go home again? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our new videos. Until I see you guys again, keep footing, futboleros.